Girl gives her food to a homeless man. Later finds out he was the owner of building they live in. The universe of kindness, Lila Thompson had decided long ago, operated on an entirely different economic system than the rest of the world. It was the only explanation for why, on days when her checking account dipped into double digits, she still found herself stopping by May's Garden to buy 2 orders of sesame chicken instead of 1. Extra fortune cookies again, Lila? May asked, the familiar crinkle of her eyes visible above her mask as she slid the paper bag across the counter. You know me too well, Lila replied, fishing exact change from her wallet. The mental math of affording generosity already calculated. Thursday tradition. Outside, Chicago's November wind cut through her thin jacket as she headed toward the Sterling. Once an architectural showpiece of the 1920s, the building now wore its age, like an old prizefighter, proud, weathered, but still standing. Lila had fallen in love with its Art Deco flourishes and crown molding the moment she'd seen her apartment 3 years ago, even if the rent stretched her graphic design income to its breaking point. She ducked into the alley, her daily shortcut that shaved precisely 4 minutes off her commute. The first time she'd ventured this route, her mother's warnings about urban dangers had echoed in her ears. But financial necessity had a way of recalculating risk, and now the narrow passage between buildings felt as familiar as her morning coffee ritual. He was there again tonight, as he had been every Thursday since winter had settled into the city's bones. A silhouette huddled against the brick wall across from Rossetti's bakery dumpsters, wrapped in layers of mismatched clothing. His face, partially hidden beneath an army green beanie, remained a mystery of shadows and stillness, but Lila had learned to read the subtle shift of his shoulders when he recognized her approach. Hey there, she called softly, the steam from the takeout bag creating ghostly tendrils in the cold air between them. Got some extra again? Seems like a sesame chicken kind of night. She never asked his name, never pressed for his story. Some boundaries deserved their space. But she'd noticed how he kept this small territory immaculate. No litter, no evidence of overnight stays. Just a man existing in the margins of a city that had mastered the art of looking past its uncomfortable truths. He accepted the container with gloved hands missing their fingertips, nodding once, their established communication. In the faint light from the street she caught the edge of what might have been a smile, or perhaps just a grimace against the cold. Stay warm, she offered, continuing her path toward the Sterling's back entrance. The service door released her into the vintage tiled lobby with its faded grandeur, brass mailboxes dulled by decades of fingerprints, marble floors worn into subtle pathways by thousands of footsteps. The elevator announced its ancient hydraulics with a wheeze that Lila had long ago accepted as its personal greeting. Hold it, called a voice from the lobby. Lila stuck her arm out, catching the door as Mrs. Finch from 3B shuffled in, her arms laden with grocery bags. Bless you, dear, the older woman sighed, her perfectly coiffed silver hair unmoved despite her exertion. These old bones aren't what they used to be. Did you hear the news? Lila pressed the button for the 3rd floor. What news? The Sterling's being sold. Some developer wants to turn us into luxury condos. Mrs. Finch's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper despite their solitude in the elevator. Mitchell in 4A heard it from his cousin who works at the alderman's office. They're calling it urban renewal, but we all know what that means. The elevator groaned to a stop at 3, doors opening with reluctant effort. Don't quote me, Mrs. Finch added, stepping out. But I heard they've already started cycling through management companies. That new maintenance man hasn't fixed a thing. Just taking notes, making assessments. Lila forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm sure it's just rumors, Mrs. Finch. But as she continued alone to the 5th floor, unease settled into her stomach alongside hunger. The Sterling was more than just an address. It was home to retired teachers, immigrant families, artists, and service workers who'd found refuge in its affordable charm. In a city where housing prices soared monthly, the Sterling stood as a quiet rebellion against economic segregation. Her apartment greeted her with emptiness. Casey, her roommate of 2 years, had moved out last month after landing a job in Seattle, leaving Lila to shoulder the full rent until she found a replacement. The timing couldn't be worse. Her freelance graphic design work had slowed to a trickle as companies tightened budgets for the coming year. She settled at her small dining table, the ornate bay window, her favorite feature, framing the city lights beyond. Opening her container of sesame chicken, she flipped through a stack of mail accumulated over the week. bills, catalogs, and a thin envelope bearing the Sterling's letterhead, but with a law firm's return address she didn't recognize. Her phone buzzed with a text from Blake, her neighbor across the hall. "Did you get the letter? Meeting in the community room tomorrow at 7. Bring your lease." Lila set down her fork and tore open the envelope. Inside was a single page with the heading Lease Addendum Re Property Access and Resident Conduct Standards. The language was dense, filled with legal terms that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. She scanned to the signature line where Braith Property Group was printed in crisp serif type. Not the Sterling's usual management company. As Mrs. Finch had predicted, something was changing hands. Quietly, strategically, outside her window, snow began to fall, delicate flakes catching the glow of streetlights. Somewhere in the alley below, a man ate sesame chicken from a takeout container, unaware that forces were already in motion that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could imagine. For now, though, they remained strangers connected only by food freely given and gratefully received. Two souls navigating a city where kindness was increasingly becoming the most valuable currency of all. The Sterling's community room had never felt so small. What was typically a sparse gathering for holiday potlucks now overflowed with anxious residents, the air thick with perfume, aftershave, and undercurrents of fear. Lila squeezed between a cluster of folding chairs, nodding at familiar faces as she found a spot near the back wall. Blake, his architectural textbooks momentarily abandoned, stood at the front with a clipboard. "Let's get started," he announced, his voice steady despite the tension. "Raise your hand if you've received at least one of the following in the past month: a lease addendum, a property access form, or notification of escape." Every hand in the room went up, including Lila's. Now keep it raised if maintenance requests have gone unanswered longer than usual. Only 3 hands went down. And finally, keep it up if you've noticed new security cameras in the hallways or stairwells. The forest of hands remained steady. Lila hadn't noticed the cameras herself, but then again she rarely used the main stairwell, preferring the back service stairs near her apartment. "This isn't coincidence," Blake continued, pushing his glasses up. "The Braith Property Group is systematically documenting everything about this building and its residents. Not for improvements, for elimination." Mrs. Callahan, who'd lived in 5B since before Lila was born, raised a trembling hand. "Yesterday, a young man in a suit knocked on my door. Said he was the new property manager and needed to verify my occupancy. Asked how long I've lived here, if I had family nearby." Her voice faltered. He smiled the whole time, but his eyes were cold. "I had heart palpitations after he left. Had to call my daughter to bring my medication." Murmurs rippled through the room. Lila remembered how she'd heard Mrs. Callahan's daughter's panicked arrival through their shared wall, the EMT's radio static in the hallway. She'd brought over soup the next day, assuming it was just another episode of Mrs. Callahan's chronic condition. "They're targeting the elderly and fixed-income residents first," said Amani from the second floor, her nurse's scrub still on from her hospital shift. "Classic gentrification playbook. Pressure the vulnerable, document minor infractions, create hostile living conditions." After the meeting disbanded with plans to contact tenants' rights organizations, Layla took the service stairs up, her mind racing. When she reached the 5th floor, she paused. Something was different. The hallway's familiar scent of lemon cleaner and age had been replaced with chemical freshness. Looking up, she spotted it, a small black dome mounted where the ceiling met the wall, its lens aimed directly at her apartment door. Inside, she double-checked the locks before collapsing onto her sofa. Her phone lit up with 3 messages from potential roommates canceling their appointments to view Casey's old room, all with similar excuses. Heard the building might be changing management, found something in a better neighborhood, decided to look elsewhere. The next morning brought more unsettling changes. A typed notice appeared on the community bulletin board announcing scheduled assessments of all units beginning next week. No specific dates. No way to prepare, just the expectation that residents would accommodate strangers entering their homes at any moment. By Friday, the back alley was empty. No sign of the man who had been Lila's silent Thursday companion for months. The spot where he usually waited was spotlessly clean, as if power washed. Even the bakery's dumpster had been relocated behind a newly installed chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Progress, sniffed the doorman when Lila asked about the changes. She hadn't recognized him, another new face hired by the mysterious Braith group. The neighborhood's improving, can't have undesirables hanging around. Lila bit her tongue, clutching her single order of sesame chicken. The universe of kindness was contracting, and she felt powerless to stop it. The weekend brought snow and stillness. Lila worked frantically on a branding project, hoping to pad her bank account before whatever storm was brewing broke fully over. The sterling Sunday night she heard Mrs. Callahan crying through the wall, not loud sobs but the quiet, desperate weeping of someone trying not to be heard. Monday morning, a large envelope appeared under Lila's door. Inside, photographs of her apartment taken through her bay window, timestamped 2:14 a.m., with yellow circles highlighting unauthorized window treatments that violated building aesthetic guidelines. A section of her lease was attached, with fine print she'd never noticed before underlined in red. There was also a formal complaint about persistent food delivery to unauthorized individuals on property grounds. They'd been watching her. For how long? Blake caught her in the hallway that afternoon, his voice low. They installed keyloggers on the lobby computer. Ricard in 6C works in cybersecurity. He found them yesterday when he was printing resumes. They're monitoring who's organizing, who's talking. What about your meeting? The tenants' rights groups? Blake's shoulders slumped. 3 law firms turned us down, said they couldn't go against Braith. Too powerful, too many connections. The 4th never called back. That night, unable to sleep, Lila stood at her bay window watching snowflakes dance in the glow of a streetlight. Movement caught her eye, a figure in the alleyway, but not her usual Thursday friend. This person moved with purpose, photographing the building's foundation, making notes on a tablet. Occasionally, they looked up, scanning the windows. When they turned, the streetlight caught their face, the new property manager who'd disturbed Mrs. Callahan. Lila stepped back from the window, heart pounding. Whatever game was being played at the Sterling, the rules were invisible, and the stakes felt impossibly high. The next morning, Mrs. Callahan's apartment was empty. No goodbye, no forwarding address. Just a cleaning crew, erasing all evidence of 40 years of life. On her door, Lila found a bright orange notice. Lay's violation inspection, tomorrow, 9. The invisible countdown clock had just become terrifyingly visible. Lila had 24 hours before her world would change forever. Miss Thompson, your lease clearly states in Section 17, Paragraph 4, Subsection C that any persistent violation constitutes grounds for immediate termination. The man across from Lila hadn't bothered to introduce himself, though the gleaming nameplate on his desk read, Victor Hansel, Property Management Executive. His suit looked expensive. Too expensive for someone who managed a slightly run-down apartment building in this part of Chicago. The office, formerly the Sterling's cheerful management space, with its mismatched furniture and bulletin board of community events, had been transformed overnight into a sterile corporate environment. Even the air smelled different, sanitized, cold. But I haven't violated anything, Lila said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. I've paid my rent on time every month for 3 years. I've never had a complaint against me. Victor slid a folder across the desk. Inside were more photographs. Lila entering the building through the service entrance. Lila handing food to the homeless man in the alley. Lila attending Blake's tenant meeting. Unauthorized use of emergency exits. Distribution of resources to non-residents on property grounds. Participation in unsanctioned gatherings aimed at disrupting building operations. He ticked each item off on manicured fingers. Any one of these would be sufficient cause. Lila stared at the photos, her mind racing. These aren't lease violations. These are normal behaviors. Human behaviors. Perhaps at your next residence, Victor replied, his smile never reaching his eyes. The Sterling is undergoing a necessary evolution. We're cultivating a particular community profile. You mean you're driving out anyone who can't afford luxury rents? Lila snapped, her designer's eye catching the expensive paper stock of the termination notice. This isn't legal. Victor's smile tightened. I assure you, Miss Thompson. Everything we're doing is perfectly within legal parameters. You have 14 days to vacate. Your security deposit will be processed within 30 days minus any charges for restoration of the unit to original condition. He glanced meaningfully at her file, including removal of unauthorized adhesives used for your artistic endeavors on the walls. Command center mock-ups for her latest design project. Painter's tape that wouldn't leave a mark. But arguing seemed pointless now. Outside, wet snow pelted Lila's face as she stumbled toward the legal aid office Blake had found, one that had finally agreed to at least look at their situation. The waiting room was already crowded with familiar faces from the Sterling, all clutching similar folders with identical termination notices. They got you too? Blake looked up from a stack of papers, dark circles under his eyes. I was 3 months from finishing my architecture degree. Now I have to find a new place in the middle of the semester with rent prices through the roof. The attorney they eventually spoke with, a harried woman named Karen Diaz, didn't offer much hope. Braith Property Group is notorious for these tactics. They operate within the letter of the law, while violating its spirit completely. They find loopholes and exploit them. What about tenant protection laws? Lila asked. They've prepared for those, Karen replied, scanning their notices. See how they've documented everything? Created paper trails, multiple warnings? They make it look like you're problem tenants, even when the problems themselves are manufactured. She pointed to a paragraph Lila hadn't noticed before. And they've added this new clause to your original lease terms. Lila leaned forward, squinting at the fine print. Resident understands and agrees that occupancy alignment with community standards, including empathy metrics and behavioral congruence with property values, constitutes an ongoing condition of tenancy. Empathy metrics? What does that even mean? Lila asked. It's deliberately vague, Karen explained. That's how they win. They create terms that can be interpreted however they need in the moment. To fight this, we'd need to prove discriminatory intent, which would require access to their internal communications. So they win, Blake said flatly, just like that. Back in her apartment, Lila began the heartbreaking process of sorting her life into boxes. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from Sterling residents. Imani had found cockroaches deliberately planted in her apartment during an inspection. The elderly couple in 2A discovered their heat mysteriously no longer worked, despite freezing temperatures. Blake's water had been shut off for repairs with no timeline for restoration. Collapsing onto her window seat, Lila stared at the termination notice again. Something about the typography bothered her professional sensibilities. The letter used 2 slightly different fonts for the main text versus the fine print, almost imperceptible, unless you worked with typography daily, and the signature line didn't quite align with the margin guidelines used throughout the rest of the document. As a designer, she recognized the telltale signs of a document that had been altered after its initial creation. Someone had added that bizarre empathy metrics clause later, trying to match the original formatting but failing in subtle ways. This wasn't just petty eviction, it was systematic, orchestrated selection. But for what purpose? Her phone rang, an unknown number. Hello? Miss Thompson, came a voice she didn't recognize. This is Sam from the Sterling Service Office. We need to verify your forwarding address for security deposit purposes. I haven't found a new place yet, she replied, suspicion growing. The Sterling had never had a service office. I see. Well, when you do, please be sure to register it with our relocation tracker. It's important we maintain accurate records for all former residents. Former residents? As if she was already gone. After hanging up, Lila noticed a business card had been slipped under her door while she was out. Plain white, with just a phone number printed in simple black text. No name, no company, just digits. She flipped it over, on the back written in neat handwriting. Thursday Alley, 8 p.m. Bring your lease. Lila stared at the card, her heart racing. Her alley friend? Someone who knew about him. A trap from management? With nothing left to lose, she decided the answer didn't matter. In 13 days she would have no home, no history in this building she'd come to love, no chance to fight back against the invisible forces dismantling her community piece by piece. She tucked the card into her pocket, oddly comforted by its mysterious promise. Whatever came next, trap or salvation, it had to be better than this powerless freefall. The alley was darker than usual. Someone had smashed the single streetlight that normally cast a weak glow over the bakery's dumpsters. Whether through vandalism or strategic planning, Lila couldn't tell. She checked her watch. 7. The business card felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. Its cryptic message either a lifeline or a cruel joke. She huddled deeper into her coat as wind whistled between the buildings. Whoever had summoned her here was late, or wasn't coming at all. A shiver ran through her that had nothing to do with the cold. What if this was just another of Braith's tactics? Document her breaking some obscure rule about loitering to accelerate her eviction. You came. The voice behind her was unfamiliar yet somehow resonant, as if she'd heard its cadence before but never its full strength. Lila spun around. A man stood at the alley entrance, silhouetted against the distant glow of streetlights. Not the hunched figure she'd grown accustomed to, but someone who stood with an easy confidence, shoulders squared beneath a tailored wool coat. As he stepped closer, the shadows retreated from his face. Clean shaven, dark hair, neatly trimmed, eyes green with flecks of gold, that studied her with unsettling familiarity. You don't recognize me, he stated, not a question but an observation. Though we've shared many meals together, understanding crashed over Lila, like ice water. The posture was different, the clothing transformed, but something about the man's eyes triggered a flash of recognition. You're, she began, unable to finish as disbelief closed her throat. Elliot Braith, he supplied, extending a hand that bore no resemblance to the gloved, weathered palms that had accepted her takeout containers for months. Silent majority shareholder of the Sterling until recently, heir to the Braith property group. Lila didn't take his hand. This is a joke, right? Some sick way to humiliate us before kicking us out? The betrayal felt personal. Every shared meal, every unspoken moment of connection reduced to corporate espionage. Elliot lowered his hand. I understand your anger, but I'm not who you think I am. He gestured toward the far end of the alley. Walk with me, it's safer than standing still. Against her better judgment, Lila fell into step beside him, her mind spinning with questions. You've been watching us? Pretending to be homeless? Not pretending, he corrected quietly. Living truthfully under different circumstances. I wanted to understand the Sterling. Not as numbers on a balance sheet, but as a living ecosystem. My father died 6 months ago, leaving me controlling interest in a company I barely recognized anymore. They reached the street, where a sleek black car waited. Elliot opened the back door, revealing a mobile office setup, laptop, documents, an array of screens displaying security feeds from the Sterling. After you, he said. Lila hesitated. I'm not going anywhere with you. You're not. We're staying right here. He smiled slightly. I just prefer my evidence organized rather than scattered across an alley. Reluctantly, Lila slid into the car, noting the exits, both doors unlocked, windows down despite the cold. Elliot joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. 3 months ago, I discovered discrepancies in the Sterling's management records. Maintenance requests that were marked completed, but never addressed. Rent increases that never appeared in official accounting. Something was happening, but I couldn't see it from the executive suite. So you decided to play homeless? Lila challenged. I decided to see my buildings through the eyes of those who live in and around them, he countered. The alley offered perfect sightlines to the service entrance, the delivery bay, the staff parking. What I saw disgusted me. He opened a laptop, displaying surveillance footage of Victor Hansel accepting an envelope from a contractor, then signing off on repairs that clearly hadn't been done. Kickbacks. Falsified inspections. Deliberate neglect to drive out long-term tenants and accelerate turnover. Elliot's voice hardened. My father built this company on quality affordable housing. In the 10 years since he stepped back from daily operations, it's become something unrecognizable. Victor and his team have been orchestrating a systematic purge of properties like the Sterling, bleeding them dry, then selling to luxury developers. Lila's mind raced. But the lease terminations, the addendums, they all have Braith Property Group letterhead. Forgeries, mostly, created by Victor's team without board approval. Elliot handed her a file, including yours. Inside was a copy of her termination notice, alongside an internal memo from Victor. Subject: Thompson displays excessive community engagement and ethical priorities. Flagged for expedited removal before others can rally around her. You were targeted because you care, Elliot said simply. You saw humanity where Victor saw liability. You built community where he wanted isolation. You treated a seemingly homeless man with dignity when others looked away. Lila studied him, searching for deception. Why should I believe any of this? Because as of yesterday, Victor Hansel is no longer employed by Braith Property Group. Elliot showed her a termination letter bearing his signature. Neither are 14 other executives who participated in this scheme across our Chicago properties. And what about our termination notices? Invalid. Never approved by the board. He pulled out a stack of envelopes. These are the real notices, lease renewals with 3-year rate locks for every tenant who wishes to stay. Mrs. Callahan has already been contacted. She'll be returning from her daughter's house tomorrow. Lila felt lightheaded. This doesn't make sense. Why go through such an elaborate charade? Why not just fire them and be done with it? Because corruption reaches further than you'd imagine. I needed irrefutable evidence, gathered firsthand. I needed to understand which tenants succumbed to pressure, and which fought back. I needed to know my buildings as homes, not just assets. His eyes met hers, and I needed allies who cared as much as I do. Allies? She echoed. I'm creating a tenant integration council for each Braith property. Residents will have direct input on management decisions, maintenance priorities, and community development. He paused. I'd like you to lead the Sterling's council. Before Lila could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Blake. Emergency meeting. Sterling lobby, now. Elliot glanced at his watch. Right on schedule. The new management team is introducing themselves. He opened the car door. After you, Miss Thompson. I believe we have a meeting to attend. As they walked toward the Sterling, Lila's mind whirled with questions and possibilities. The man beside her was simultaneously a stranger, and someone she'd shared dozens of silent meals with. A contradiction that somehow made perfect sense in the upside-down reality her life had become. One last question, she said, as they approached the building. The clause about empathy metrics, was that real? Elliot's lips curved into a genuine smile. Very real. My father's original policy before it was buried in legal jargon. The Sterling was always meant to be more than just housing. It was meant to be a community where kindness mattered, as much as paying rent on time. He held the door open for her. Some clauses are worth keeping, don't you think? The Sterling's lobby hummed with confusion. Residents clustered in bewildered groups, staring at the new notices that had appeared under every door simultaneously. Pristine white envelopes replacing the ominous orange termination packets. Blake spotted Lila first, relief washing over his exhausted face until his eyes shifted to the man beside her. Recognition triggered visible whiplash. That's him, Blake hissed, pulling Lila aside. The suit from the meeting. The one who's been— I know who he is, Lila interrupted. It's complicated. Complicated? Blake's voice rose. He's Elliot Braith. His company is evicting us. Heads turned, conversation died into the silence. Elliot stepped forward, his presence commanding attention without effort. You're right to be angry, he said, addressing the room. But you're wrong about who's responsible. My name is Elliot Braith, and I'm here to show you exactly what's been happening at the Sterling. He set up a laptop, connecting it to the ancient television that had once shown holiday movies during building gatherings. The screen flickered to life, displaying security footage of Victor Hansel's office. For the next 20 minutes, residents watched in stunned silence as the evidence unfolded. Victor and his team discussing tenant elimination strategies, falsifying inspection reports, and plotting targeted harassment campaigns against specific residents. Most damning was footage of Victor laughing as he described Mrs. Callahan's panic attack as 1 down, 39 to go. When the presentation ended, Imani from the second floor stood up. Why should we trust you? This could all be staged. A fair question, Elliot acknowledged. Which is why I've invited someone else tonight. The lobby doors opened, and Mrs. Callahan entered, accompanied by a distinguished older woman who bore a striking resemblance to Elliot. My mother, Margaret Braith, Elliot explained. Former head of tenant relations and my father's partner in building this company. She's been reviewing all operations since I alerted her to the discrepancies. Margaret stepped forward, her silver hair elegantly coiffed but her expression fierce. The Sterling was the first building my husband and I purchased together in 1975. We raised Elliot in an apartment on the 3rd floor until he was 7 years old. What's happened here is a betrayal of everything we built. Mrs. Callahan nodded. Margaret called me personally yesterday, arranged for a car to bring me back. My apartment's already been restored, everything exactly as I left it. The tension in the room began to ease, skepticism giving way to cautious hope. I'd like to show you something else, Elliot said, gesturing toward the old service elevator. If you'll follow me. The residents exchanged glances before following him to the building's basement, a space most had never entered. What had once been storage and laundry facilities had been transformed into a makeshift command center. One wall displayed blueprints of the Sterling. Another held photographs of each resident alongside profiles that made Lila's skin crawl. Thompson. Lila, designer, 28. Regular contact with undesirables. Community organizer, employment volatile. Recommended action, immediate removal. Callahan, Dorothy, widow, 7'4". Fixed income. No family support structure in immediate vicinity. Susceptible to pressure tactics. Recommended action, stress-based displacement. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as residents found their own profiles, each with similarly calculated assessments of vulnerability and recommended actions. This operation was sophisticated, Elliot explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. Victor and his team have been running this playbook across multiple properties, identifying who would be easiest to remove, creating hostile living conditions, and forcing out residents to prepare buildings for luxury conversion. He moved to a filing cabinet, withdrawing stacks of documents. These are the real records: maintenance requests that were deliberately ignored, tenant complaints that were buried, kickbacks from contractors for signing off on work never completed. Blake leafed through a file, his architectural training allowing him to spot the discrepancies immediately. These inspection reports are completely falsified. The building's in better structural condition than they claimed. Exactly, Elliot confirmed. They were manufacturing a crisis to justify massive rent hikes or complete redevelopment. Lila studied the wall of resident profiles, a designer's eye noticing something odd about their arrangement. These are color-coded, she realized. Green, yellow, red. Vulnerability assessments, Margaret explained, disgust evident in her voice. Green for those they considered unlikely to fight back. Red for those they identified as potential troublemakers. She nodded toward Lila's profile. Your file is the brightest red I've seen across any property. Despite everything, Lila felt a strange flicker of pride. Elliot continued. For the past 3 months I've been systematically dismantling this operation, gathering evidence, identifying conspirators, and preparing to rebuild what they've damaged. He turned to face the group, starting with offering every current resident a new lease with guaranteed rate protection for 5 years. The room erupted in questions, disbelief mingling with desperate hope. What about the repairs they've been ignoring? Are the security cameras staying? How do we know this isn't just another trick? Margaret stepped forward. Valid concerns, which is why we're establishing a new management structure. Elliot, I'm creating a tenant integration council, he explained. Elected residents who'll have direct input on building operations, maintenance priorities, and community development. Real power, not just symbolic representation. As the meeting continued, Lila slipped away, needing space to process everything. She found herself back in the alley, the same spot where she'd shared countless silent meals with a man who'd been watching, evaluating, understanding, but not in the way Victor had. It's a lot to take in, Elliot said quietly, having followed her outside. Why me? Lila asked finally. Why show yourself to me first? Because you were the only one who saw a person in that alley, not a problem. He leaned against the brick wall, the same spot where he'd once huddled in disguise. Everyone walks past homelessness, poverty, struggle. You stopped, you acknowledged humanity without requiring anything in return. It was just takeout, she said, embarrassed by his assessment. It was dignity, he corrected. The same thing my father taught me should be at the core of housing, not just providing walls and a roof, but creating space for human dignity to flourish. From her apartment window above, Lila had often looked down on this alley, seeing only a small fragment of the city's complex ecosystem. Now she stood within it, understanding that she'd been part of a much larger story all along. The council position, she said finally. I'll think about it. Elliot nodded, respecting her need for space. Take your time. The Sterling isn't going anywhere. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Miss Thompson, your bay window design proposals, the ones from your vision board, the building committee might be very interested in seeing those for the roof garden renovation. Lila stared after him as he walked away, realizing that the quiet man in the alley had seen and understood far more than she'd ever imagined. The city lights flickered above, stars appearing in the gaps between buildings, small points of brightness connecting into constellations she was only now beginning to recognize. 6 months passed like a turning season, subtle yet transformative. Spring brought more than just thawing snow to Sterling. It brought scaffolding, construction crews, and the persistent sound of renewal that now filled the hallways. Lila watched from her bay window as workers installed the final glass panels on the rooftop garden greenhouse. Her design, her vision, now manifested in steel and transparency. Miss Thompson, a voice called from her doorway. The committee is waiting. Lila gathered her presentation materials, sketches for the next phase of renovations, focusing on modernizing the lobby while preserving its Art Deco character. As head of the Tenant Integration Council, her once hobby of design had evolved into a part-time position with Braith Property Group, complementing her freelance work that had, coincidentally, flourished since her portfolio began featuring the Sterling's transformation. The council meeting unfolded in the newly renovated community room. Once a neglected afterthought, now a bright space where residents gathered not out of desperation, but collaboration. Miss Callahan sat in her usual spot by the window, her knitting needles clicking steadily as resident representatives discussed upcoming improvements. The laundry room renovation is complete, Blake announced. Now graduated and serving as liaison between residents and the architectural team. And the new security system has been installed, keycard access only, with protocols approved by the safety committee. When the meeting concluded, Lila lingered, watching residents chat casually with the management team. The invisible wall between them and us dissolved through months of transparent operation and fulfilled promises. Quite a difference from our first gathering in this room, Elliot observed, joining her at the refreshment table. His visits to the Sterling had become regular but never intrusive, a careful balance that maintained professional boundaries while acknowledging their unusual connection. I keep expecting to wake up and find orange notices under everyone's doors again, Lila admitted, pouring coffee into a mug emblazoned with the Sterling's new logo. Her design naturally. Old trauma dies hard, Elliot acknowledged. But I think we're building something resilient enough to outlast it. Outside, Chicago's spring sunset painted the building's restored facade in warm gold. Former tenants had returned to newly renovated units with surprisingly affordable leases. New residents, carefully selected for community fit rather than just financial qualifications, were integrating smoothly. The Sterling's transformation had even sparked conversations throughout the neighborhood about ethical development and tenant rights. The grant proposal was approved, Elliot mentioned casually, watching her reaction from the corner of his eye. The city's matching our investment in the community garden project. Lila's eyes widened. All of it? Even the apprenticeship program? Especially the apprenticeship program. The Urban Agriculture Initiative will start accepting applications next month. He smiled slightly. The committee thought you might want to lead the design workshop. It had been her most ambitious proposal, converting the adjacent vacant lot into a community garden with paid apprenticeships for neighborhood youth. The kind of project that changed not just buildings but lives. As twilight deepened, Lila found herself following her old routine, walking through the service entrance, cutting through the alley. The space had transformed alongside the building. What was once a neglected passage now featured mural-painted walls, security lighting, and planters that would soon burst with flowers and herbs. At the spot where she'd once shared meals with a silent stranger, a small commemorative plaque had been installed. The Alley Project, where dignity creates community, established. She smiled at the understated memorial to connections formed in unlikely places. Then continued her Thursday tradition, this time heading to the community kitchen, where residents took turns preparing meals for elderly neighbors, local shelter residents, and anyone else who needed a hot dinner and human connection. Rounding the corner toward the kitchen, she nearly collided with Elliot, who carried a stack of takeout containers. "Mr. Braith," she greeted him formally, though a smile played at her lips. "Didn't expect to see you tonight. Just dropping off the weekly donation," he replied with equal formality, though his eyes held the same warmth she'd eventually recognized from their alley encounters. Maze Garden sends their best. They're considering opening a second location in the retail space downstairs. Their careful dance of professional respect had become something of a building legend, the designer and the developer. Collaborators with boundaries neither seemed willing to cross, yet something lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable, an understanding forged in unlikely circumstances that had transformed them both. "I've been meaning to ask," Elliot said as they arranged the food for distribution. "Why did you keep bringing food to the alley even after I revealed myself? I noticed the containers still appeared every Thursday for weeks." Lila shrugged. "Old habits. And there are others who use that passage. Just because you weren't there anymore didn't mean the need disappeared." Elliot nodded, understanding what she didn't need to verbalize. Kindness wasn't transactional, and compassion didn't require recognition to retain value. As volunteers gathered to begin the evening meal service, Lila took her place among them, no longer an isolated tenant fighting invisible forces, but part of something sustainable and genuine. The Sterling stood as it always had, its bones sturdy beneath renovated systems, its heart beating in the community that now truly called it home. Later that evening, she stood on the newly completed roof garden, her designs brought to life in planters and pathways. Far below she could see someone new in the alley, a young woman leaving food by the bakery wall before hurrying away. The cycle continuing, one small kindness at a time. Perhaps that was the most meaningful transformation of all, not the repaired building or the transparent management, or even the community programs, but the reminder that sometimes the person you help in one chapter becomes the one offering you keys to the next. And that kindness, like the Sterling itself, could be renovated and expanded but never truly destroyed as long as someone remembered its blueprint. "Ready for tomorrow's presentation?" Elliot asked, joining her by the roof's edge, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Always," Lila replied, watching the city lights blink on around them. The future stretched before them, a blueprint neither could have designed alone, yet somehow perfect in its unexpected harmony.